Once you become comfortable with performing a simple critique, then you're ready to move on to perform a complete composition critique. And we're going to use the same 4 pillars of composition: simplicity, asymmetry, eye lines, and point of view. And as always, we're going to start with simplicity. Remember, always build with the strengths, begin with those, and then identify the weaknesses. All right, let's just dive right in and look at the 4 components of simplicity: the number of image elements, the internal complexity, separation, and the primary visual element in the image. Well, first of all, let's just overall look at the images and see if there's some nice elements, and indeed there are, right? I love these foreground wheels here with the axles from the old train. It's terrific, and they're even more obvious here. So there are some nice image elements here. But overall, just looking at this visually, it looks a little complex. We can quantify that by counting the elements. So let's start. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and another 5 here, and 1 here, and then the sky. There's really a lot. So much more than the less than or equal to 4 elements we're looking for. So we've quantified our overall sense of complexity and go, oh, that's why it looks so complex. There's so many image elements. Upper image, it's better, isn't it? All right, there are fewer elements, but still, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm not sure, maybe 7, 8. So we still double what we normally look for with less than or equal to 4. So right off the bat, the beginning of our critique, we can see that both of these images have got some problems in terms of complexity, in terms of number of image elements. But let's go on and see about some of these other criteria. Let's look at internal complexity. When we look at this image, are there some simple areas in the image? Sure, the sky back here is very simple. But remember, one of the things we talked about, looking at areas that are too dead, too simple, too much of it, this sky is nice and simple, but there's a little bit too much of it. When we look at the rest of the image, boy, this middle ground is very complex. The foreground is a little bit better. And when we compare it with this image here, that simpler foreground area is emphasized in this image. So in terms of overall internal complexity, this is better. But in the middle ground and background areas of this image, again, we've got that complexity that's coming through from this image here. So better, but still not great. Then when we look at separation of image elements, let's go back to this one again. Good separation here, even though we've got a little bit too much sky. But separation in the rest of the image, that's one of the reasons why this image overall appears to be too complex. When we move up to the upper right-hand image, because it's smaller and less complex overall, we can see there's a little bit better separation visually between these two and between this and the water. So there's better separation overall, but there's still crossover here and crossover here. There's not a lot of distinguishing between the two elements here. So better, but still not great. And as far as primary visual elements are concerned, in this image, what really pops out when you first look at the image is this really simple blue sky, because the rest of the image is kind of so complex. So there's really no primary visual element. This image, it's better. It's tighter cropped. We've got fewer elements in here, and these are the primary elements, even though they're not super well separated. But so see, this guy up here is coming in trying to steal a little bit of the visual show. So not terrific on the primary visual elements, but some good starts here, some nice elements to work with. All right, so that's simplicity. Let's dive in and take a look at asymmetry. And we'll look at all 4 of these criteria. We'll look at vertical and horizontal asymmetry. Lower image, draw the line. The left and the right is somewhat different, which is good, particularly up top, which is nice. We go top and bottom, they're certainly different. The 4 quadrants are different, particularly the upper 2, and the lower 2 here are okay. But remember, we've got an element that's pretty darn close to the center of the image here, which is this axle here. So the asymmetry is not too bad here, but it's not great either. And if you use the rule of thirds to kind of augment this whole discussion, and you draw those lines in your image, you can see that a lot of the elements are offset. But even though we've got fairly good elements of asymmetry in here, because of the overall complexity, it really doesn't come through. Top image, much better, right? Because we have fewer elements, and these elements are probably the most asymmetrical in both of the images, and this image does concentrate on this. So it's better, no doubt about it. Then when we look for eye lines, and remember, the eye lines and asymmetry work well together. And again, when we look at the lower image, we do have some eye lines down here that are part of the image, but they're relatively short compared to the entire image. So it doesn't really move the eye across the image very much. Same thing here. There's a straight line, but it really doesn't move across the image very much. Here we've got an eye line, but it's kind of interrupted by the boiler. So no real continuous eye lines that move the eye around the image. In contrast, the top image, because these 2 image elements with these eye lines make up most of the image, you've got a more continuous movement of the eye across the image from here. But in this case, this eye line is kind of interrupted. So again, this image is better than this one in terms of your eye lines coming from asymmetry. And in terms of point of view, remember we look at scale and position and unusual views or unexpected views. Well, in both of these images, these are kind of standard 5 to 6 foot views holding a camera up to the human eye. So they're okay, but they're not very inspired. And I'd like to see some more creative shot positions because there's lots of opportunity for that with all these different beautiful textures and fabrics. All right, now that we've finished our critique, I just want to remind you once again, evaluate in the same order every single time. And you can develop kind of your own fine-tuned order, but I really recommend that you always start with simplicity, and then you can do asymmetry, eye lines, and point of view in whatever order you want to, and typically asymmetry and eye lines you'll do together. But simplicity is the foundation for this.